however believing they may otherwise be. Any ideas who might have said that? He also says, he continues in the same strain and says, وَأُمُورُ النَّاسِ فِي الدُّنْيَا تَسْتَقِيمُ مَعَ الْعَدْلِ الَّذِي فِيهِ بَعْضُ الْإِشْتِرَاكِ بِإِثْمٍ. People in this world can prosper so long as there is justice, even if there is sin taking place. Right? Even if not everyone's praying and if not everyone's staying away from bad things, but there is justice in society. The society is inherently just. That society has a much greater chance of survival than a society which is a society of injustice, even though it's a very pious society. And that should sound like a contradiction in terms. How can you be pious and yet be unjust? Because people make this division. They think piety is what you do with God, and the way that you treat God's creation is somehow unrelated. Well, of course it's not. Our Prophet tells us about a woman who finds her way into hell because of her cruel treatment of a cat. And she'd otherwise been a pious woman. And he tells us about a woman who finds her way into heaven because of giving water on a hot day to a dog. And she was otherwise baghaya min baghaya bani Israel, a woman of ill repute from the harlots of the Israelites. This is the wording of the hadith. It says a woman who was not of a very righteous vocation finds her way into God's mercy because she shows mercy towards an animal. So these are big things to think about. That was Ibn Taymiyyah. You've heard of Ibn Taymiyyah? Ibn Taymiyyah says, God will give life to a community that knows how to be just unto itself. Even if they're otherwise sinful. There are people who are doing things which are themselves a sin. But He will not give life. He will not give continuity to a community where people oppress one another, where the powerful take advantage of the weak, where people become self-righteous and with whips they bring everybody else. I mean, I don't know if you've seen any of the footage that's coming out of what's being called Daesh, الدولة الإسلامية في العراق والشام, or the Islamic State of Iraq and Sham. Crazy people. People who, we don't have the right to do that. Sufyan al-Thawri said, إذا رأيت الرجل يعمل العمل الذي قد يختلف فيه وأنت ترى غيره فلا تنهه. If you ever see a man do an action which you totally disagree with, but it is an action which is a matter of difference of opinion, you have no right to impose your view upon him. And there are people that call themselves now an Islamic state. And the biggest issues of this state are to stop men stop people from smoking cigarettes and listening to music, to force women in hijab. The Prophet of God did not force a single woman into hijab, and here people are forcing women into niqab, covering of the face. Even the Christians. There are Christian Syrians in this area, and they're being forced to. This is not Islam, this is some insanity. Umar ibn al-Khattab, the community of Medina was a community where women went around in the time of God's messenger, and not all of them were covered in the hijab. And that is the historic fact. And the Christian and the Jew, we guarded jealously, just as we guarded their right to have places of worship, their right to worship Jesus, their right to the cross, their right to we guarded their right to rear pigs and to brew wine, whilst we consider these haram for ourselves. And our legal texts speak about how the Christian and the Jew must be allowed to do the things that their religion allows them to do. We must not impose our religion upon them, for we have promised them security, and there is no security if we take away from them their right to live according to their tradition. We cannot force our religion upon them. This is our classical history. So we have a situation of injustice. And I wanted to end by saying God said If God helps you, none can defeat you, but if He withholds His help, you're in serious trouble. Sometimes we look around at the world today, we think about Timbuktu and Mali, we think about the Taliban and Afghanistan, we think about now these people in Syria and in Iraq, and we think there is really a divine mercy and wisdom in not giving greater victory to people who think Islam is about forcing people into certain types of clothing, forcing people into certain types of lifestyle. When Islam came about, Rabi'i ibn Amir said, "Inna Allah bta'athana ilaykum linukhrijakum min ibadati al-ibad." We have only come seeking that you should be freed from servitude towards human beings and allowed the opportunity to know God. But we can't force you to that. I end on this because it's really late. I need to catch a train. And you know, I'm sure I don't know if there are questions. If there are, maybe we can entertain a few. Thank you very much. I hope some of the randomly sort of put together thoughts have been of use to people. Yes, my friend.
I wanted to ask you, you said about not forcing people to believe. From the Quran, 2:193, it says, "Fight them until there is no more fitna, and worship is acknowledged for Allah."
Very good.
Also, from chapter 4, 89, "They wish you would disbelieve as they disbelieve, as you would be alike. So do not take them among allies until they emigrate for the cause of Allah. But if they turn away, then seize them and kill them wherever you find them, and take not from them an ally or helper."
That's very good.
So
You'd like me to speak about? Okay. I like that, and I'm grateful to you. I'm grateful for the opportunity to do this, because a lot of times, of course, people take a verse, and there are Muslims that are just as guilty of this. Anyone who had the misfortune to watch the little video speech of one of the Woolwich murderers, right? He was quoting scripture after the evil act that he'd committed. He was quoting scripture. And so sometimes Muslim as well as non-Muslim will do it and say, "Oh, well, look, the Quran actually says this, so please don't tell us that there's no forcing people." Well, there's a short answer and slightly less short answer. But the short answer, the kind of really quick one, is if it meant what it seems to be saying, then surely 1,000 years of Muslim rule in India, over 1,400 years of Muslim rule in Syria and in Egypt, and 600 and something years of Muslim rule in Turkey and the Balkans later, there could not exist a non-Muslim community in any of these regions. And yet, 1,000 years of Muslim rule in India later, non-Muslim Indians are the majority, and Muslims who have been ruling for the last millennium are a minority. The Hindus are the majority. The Christians, I've mentioned, of course, the Eastern Orthodox, the Jewish communities of Spain that then moved to Turkey. There are Jewish communities in Turkey today which are there from the time of the Spanish Inquisition, when Christians decided that you had to either become a Christian, and a very particular type of Christian. Of course, we know about the Inquisition, and you could be a Christian and not safe from accusations of heresy and be. And so the point is, the Quran, if it was understood to be saying that, then clearly the Prophet himself was not practicing that, because there were Jewish and Christian communities that he lived among, that he took contracts with. So what is it saying? Can you just remind me of the first verse?
The first one I read was, "Fight them until there is no more fitna."
Yeah. قاتلهم حتى لا تكون فتنة ويكون الدين لله فإن انتهوا فلا عدوان. Do you have the next bit? فإن انتهوا. If they cease. فلا عدوان إلا على الظالمين.
The other part contradicts that, because it says even if they turn away, then seize them and kill them. So
And say the next bit, please.
from 489.
Yeah. Say the next bit. So the first one, just before I do that then, I'll come on to that. The first one is quite clear, isn't it? It's saying, fight them until there's no لا عدوان إلا على الظالمين.
And until worship for Allah.
Worship becomes only for Allah. And you see, Allah, if you ever pick up a Bible that comes from the Arab world, you'll see the word Allah all over it as well. In the beginning was the God. Fil bad'i kana Allah. And the word was with God. Wal kalimatu kana ma'allah. And the word was God. Wal kalimatu kanatillah. That's scripture for my Christian friends in Arabic view. So there's a lot of Allah in the way. Allah isn't the Muslim God as opposed to the Christian God. It is the idea of not allowing persecution that prevents people from God. This is a very specific historic context. It is the context of the 12 years, people who were persecuting others because they made a religious choice, a faith choice, a choice of conscience. Fight them until there is no more fitna. Fitna quite literally means persecution. It means there is tribulation. People are being disbarred, prevented from being able to worship God as they choose fit. Fight them until this ceases to exist. وَيَكُونَ الدِّينُ لِلَّهِ. And religion becomes for God. In other words, the human being has the chance, is able now to worship God only for God's sake, not to have to worship an idol for fear of being tortured. فَإِنِ انْتَهَوْا. And if they cease, لَا عُدْوَانَ إِلَّا عَلَى الظَّالِمِينَ. Let there be no enmity. So it tells us that it's in the context of something else. Now the next verse, which is, can you read that to me?
I'll read the whole part.
Yeah.
It says, they wish you would disbelieve as they disbelieve,
What?
as you would be alike.
Uh-huh.
So do not take them from among them allies until they emigrate for the cause of Allah. But if they turn away, then seize them and kill them wherever you find them, and take them from among them an ally, not among them an ally or helper.
Yeah. So, and I don't know if you've looked into the Yusuf Ali, Abdullah Yusuf Ali's translation of the Quran has some very useful footnotes, which provide some of the historic references, and then that allows you to be able to look into that. وَدُّوا لَوْ تَكْفُرُونَ كَمَا كَفَرُوا. They desire that you disbelieve as they have disbelieved. This is in reference to a tribe. Now, do you remember I spoke about how historically this was a world that was at each other's throats? It is a world where alliances are made and sometimes broken, where communities come together and agree on something, and then sometimes they stab each other in the back. There's scheming, there's forming of... The Prophet has a community that he's developing, he's building in Medina. On the back of that, there are communities that live just on the outskirts of Medina, which come and they pledge allegiance to the Prophet. And then having done that, they then go back and they find it's actually more lucrative, more beneficial for them to side with the Meccans when they make a kind of what they think is an educated guess that the Meccans have amassed a large enough army to be able to destroy the Muslims, the worshippers of Allah, the followers of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And so one of the things they do is they've placed their allegiance to the Prophet and then they renege on that. It's treason. And treason, or the breaking of an accord that is agreed on, is usually, in most international law even today, considered a grounds for war. This seize them and fight them, this is the language of war. In other words, you are in a state of war with them. وَدُّوا لَوْ تَكْفُرُوا. They desire that you disbelieve as they have themselves disbelieved. And the idea was they claimed that they were happy to be with the Muslims, that they were actually part of the Muslim community by extension, or a satellite of the Muslim community. The Prophet accepted them on face value, and then when they thought it was more expedient for them, they went and reneged and made these treaties. Obviously, apostasy in the climate of those times, the Old Testament itself speaks about death for blasphemy. This was a time when apostasy is considered exactly the same as treason, where to say, I believe you are the messenger of God, and then say, actually, I'm going to go and fight or support the people who are trying to destroy you, is treason. Now, one of the things about Islam is, because it's a faith system, it's a spiritual code, but it was also an empirical sort of reality. There was ruling on the earth. There were laws. There were communities. It doesn't. People sometimes think, oh well, it's not right because there's stuff about war. But in the context of any other sovereign nation state or city state, which needs to assert its autonomy, defend its borders and not allow itself